Chris Messina, who was part of that original team, he invented the hashtag.
What?
So
I don't think I ever knew that about him.
2010, when Twitter was in its infancy,
Yep.
he was one of the early adopters, and the early adopters were trying to figure out how to like break up subject matters and be able to track them. He used the hashtag, and from there, boom, working, invented the hashtag.
We are so grateful to be supported by these community champions: Sales MD, Team Friday, Realist Lab, Kiana Patterson, Diego Chavez, Jer Boucher, Heather Ryder, Janine Sua, Lily Roca, and Steve Kernan.
Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, and welcome back, or welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers. As you may or may not know, this is the show where I get the absolute privilege to have weekly conversations with people that I consider to be some of the best and brightest entrepreneurial thinkers across all sectors and segments of society and industry, as we come together to try and both better understand the world that we live in and work in, as well as maybe leave this world a little bit better than we found it before this conversation. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by an icon in LA, Jerome Chang. He's the founder and chief architect, or just the architect, at BLANKSPACES, which everybody here in town who's in the entrepreneurial community or just the general co-working or workspace community understands BLANKSPACES relevance here in town. Super excited to talk about a lot of different stuff with him today. But first, let me tell you a little bit about him before we welcome him to the show. In my humble opinion, Jerome is a bit of a modern day Renaissance man. He's educated, he's curious, he's entrepreneurial, he's creative, he's a family man who's interested in art and politics and social issues and the world around him. He has spent nearly 20 years mastering his craft, so to speak, inside the rigid world of structural engineering and building design before deciding to break kind of all the rules in a very entrepreneurial way. He's the mind behind BLANKSPACES, as I already mentioned in his opening, which is the very first modern co-working brand in Southern California. And in an era where the word community can refer to both human gatherings as well as our physical neighborhoods, he is both a community builder in my mind and a community leader. He doesn't just design offices, he builds spaces where entrepreneurs and workers stop competing and start collaborating. From the hallowed halls of Harvard to this gritty kind of fast-paced world of in his past experiences, restaurant design. He made a run for a local board of education seat at one point. As I said, he's showing off all his Renaissance man skills. He knows exactly really what it takes to build a foundation that lasts. And he loves marrying physical space and human diversity to build for a better world than the one we inherited. And in my mind, that ethos of his, that I've always known and admired and respected here in town, is what makes him the ideal entrepreneurial thinker. And that's why he's here today, other than the fact that I asked him to come and he said yes. So Entrepreneurial Thinkers is proud to welcome you, Jerome. Happy to have you on the show, buddy.
Thanks, Rob. It's been a while since we've really had an in-depth discussion. It's great to talk to fellow entrepreneurs and freelancers in LA because, sometimes I'm just working my thing, and it's good to step away and see what other people are working on.
100%. Tell me about it. The guy who sits here in his kitchen/studio, right, and essentially does this for ourselves and for others for a living. I often tease people when they're like, "Oh, how was your week?" And I'm like, "Oh, I recorded 3 new episodes." I'm like, I am flying. I had the greatest conversations ever this week, right? Like, what a privilege I get to do this. So we've got a ton of ground to cover. As I always say on the show, the show is very much a byproduct of my own curiosities, right? And I, like you, am curious about all kinds of things. We're not going to cover all those things today because if we did, that would be like a Joe Rogan level length podcast. But we could, but you and I probably could carry a 3 or 4 hour conversation if we wanted to. So, but today we're going to kind of hone it down into stuff that we're both really intricately involved in or interested in, and then stuff you work on. But I've got some kind of curious guy questions acting as a proxy for my audience, that I believe you're going to have insights into that most guests that we have don't have insights into, because it's stuff that you obsess over, in your day to day. So first questions first. To get us started, this is just a personal observation. I feel oftentimes, and this is especially true like in this last 5 or 6 years, as I'm out on my walks, which we were talking about before we got on air, right? I feel like we're literally living in kind of a built out world the things I walk past, the neighborhoods I pass through, the spaces, the commercial, that was designed for 1985 and hasn't ever really been updated. I'm curious if you think that's true and or not, and you can educate me in either direction, right? And then if it is maybe even partially true, that it hasn't been maybe completely updated or upgraded, like how do we repurpose that 1985 world for like a 2030 world that we're hurtling toward?
Well, so unfortunately, I think we're actually still living in the 1970s, not even 1980s.
Okay.
Especially LA. When you look at the history of housing and Prop 13, Prop 13 came about in California in 1978 as basically a knee-jerk reaction to high inflation of the 70s. Inflation at that time was in like mid-teens, right?
Yep.
12, 15%. So in order for people to preserve their home and be able to afford living there, they instituted Prop 13, which limited property tax to only 1% annually year over year. So that seemed fine because then people were like, okay, I can stay in my home. But when you have, for the next 50 years, an average inflation of about 3%, that person's getting a 2/3 or 67% discount to what should be every year, year over year. So someone with a modest 2 or 3 bedroom home might only be paying $1,000 or $2,000 a year today for that property tax. But the next door with the same exact home, but recently purchased, let's say a year ago, will be paying 10 times that for the same exact square footage home. Maybe not the quality, because in the world of real estate, square footage mostly dictates everything.
Yeah.
But then both homes, the residents get the same fire department services, police services, ambulance services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah.
and access to schools and any other social benefit. So we're really living still today on the decisions we made back in the 70s. And moreover, even earlier in the 50s and 60s, because with the rise of interstate highways that blew right through major neighborhoods, neighborhoods that were vibrant.
Right. Yeah. These weren't like decrepit, collapsed neighborhoods. These were vibrant communities.
Yeah, just unfortunately, they were vibrant communities made up mostly of ethnic minorities that the decision makers, the lobbyists and politicians, predominantly white, didn't care about. So they barreled these highways through these areas, and we're still living from the after effects from that. Those displaced people have never really got a footing. They never got to buy another property. If they did, it was another place. We still are dealing with massive traffic. Even when we added a lane to the 405,
a couple of years ago, not that long ago.
Yeah. It felt great for about a week. Right. And then it got worse after that. And every other transportation planner or architect would tell you that adding a lane is the worst thing you can do to try to
alleviate traffic.
Alleviate traffic. It's always better to do mass transit or anything related to that, whether it's rail or bus, whatever, because they can just hold more people per hour.
So again, just my curious guy head, I'm out walking around and it's not necessarily, to be clear, right? It's not like I'm walking by and I'm saying like, oh, decrepit hole in the ground. Like, no, I mean, these are places that I'm walking past, sometimes businesses, sometimes residential, sometimes commercial office buildings. And many of them are open and they have things that are running out of them, right? But it's like, there's something about them that just feels as modern as our city is in like our discourse and like our placement in kind of the global scene for the things we create across all kinds of different industries, like the physical plant of the city that we live in, that we walk around, like I just feel like I felt it was stuck. And you're saying basically it did get stuck to some degree, and it got stuck primarily as a result of a series of these policy and cultural policy decisions. So it's almost more like we rushed innovatively from like 1900 to 1978, and then we just sat back and, like my dad used to say, like, sat back and read the newspaper clippings. Like we just sat back on our fat butts and our laurels, and we were like, we're pretty cool, we're great, we're huge, we're big, we're important, and we stopped evolving creatively and space wise. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we made a series of very bad decisions from the 50s to the 70s, and it only benefited certain demographics. And then we're living in the consequences of those decisions, whether it's a car-based culture. I mean, just think about the number of fast food joints that came out of SoCal. Whether it's McDonald's or
Yeah.
In-N-Out, like we
Yeah.
we gave birth to many of those that were
Yep.
car-centric, right? Yeah, there's a reason for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. So let's big picture. And thank you. That was a lot more of the answer than I was expecting. But like again, we could do a whole Proposition 13 podcast if we wanted to, right? It has such implications here. So a little bit more broadly, moving a bit more away from maybe just LA in our thinking, but more broadly for now. Like you're an architect. And so while I'm walking around and I'm thinking about these spaces that I'm walking past, I'm also just generally thinking about space, right? And space and how we work in it and we live in it and how we play in it. You and I were just both talking about like, I'm here in my space, you're in your space. You might be in different co-working spaces that you own and operate, but you're kind of doing your own thing. So tell me this, just as an architect, help the general person who's listening to understand, like, why do the spaces that we work in or live in and play in, like, why do these physical spaces matter so much in our lives?
I mean, Darwin was right. We are a product of our environment, whether the environment is organic or we built it. And the architects, even though we're known for making buildings, we're known for making things pretty. At the end of the day, we are both in the world of public safety so that the built environment is safe for you, but then we are simultaneously shaping your psychology of your relation to your surrounding space. And there's a moment during Eyes Wide Shut with Tom Cruise where like advertising's around everywhere, right? And it's individualized to each person. Architecture's worse because it's always around you. Like, so the occupational hazard for architects is that our job is always on.
True. That's true. I guess you can't shut your brain off, right? Like I'm just a fan of architecture and having had the pleasure to grow up and been born and raised in Chicago, which is a renowned great architecture city, right? Like the downtown part, at least. I'm kind of that way. Like I'm the guy that's walking around now in his 50s in LA on a walk, and I'm thinking about spaces, right? Because I think it's just like in my DNA. But I can't imagine that, right? As in your case, every building you walk into, like you must be just not analyzing, but just digesting it in a way that is like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or oh, they could have done this.
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. On the one hand, that's very emotional and psychological. There's a book called Poetics of Space. I read this back in school, and it really dials in more of the senses, the smell, the audio of a space. It'll say, hey, you have a memory when you were 7 years old and you always curled up in this one little nook in the house. You can remember the smell of the cupboard. You can remember the scratching of the cat that was always scratching at that post and beyond, right? So that's creating the environmental context that you relate to that environment at that time. And it evokes great feeling, and it might evoke bad feeling, right? But it evokes a lot of emotion. So there's a literary and emotional psychological sense to the architecture. And then there's what was my other point?
So poetics of space on one side, the emotional part of it. Is there like a physical part of it? Is there more of a use case part of it that we react to?
I mean, yes, of course. The other part of it, like you're walking into someone's art, whether the art is good or not. I mean, there's a lot of bad art and a lot of architects make us look bad, but you're walking into someone's art, right? But I think like in a modern analogy to it, you can look at it the way we look at our smartphones or our computers, right?
Okay.
When we're looking at a computer, we're always outside looking in. We are using UX, whether it's a button or a touchpad, trackpad, or a keyboard. We are using different inputs to make the thing do what you want it to do, right?
Sure.
We're outside looking in.
Like user experience, they call that, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's only outside looking in. If you think about a building's plumbing lines, its conduits as circuit boards, those are the wiring. You're living inside the computer. The building is technically the most sophisticated computer that we have. All right.
Huh.
So instead of inputting from the outside as a UX, you're experiencing user experience from the inside out and outside in. You can come in and
Okay.
out. Right.
Right.
So it becomes much more spatial.
Huh.
Right.
Interesting.
The HVAC is blowing on you. That is one way that the building is responding to your needs, and you
Yeah,
can control that through the
it's a variable related to our experience, and our experiences being both, as you said, like in the poetics reference, both the emotional kind of memory connective things that we build around how we feel inside of spaces, but then also just kind of like the practical, pragmatic usefulness of literally how we interact with a space.
Yeah, because the UX on a regular computer, right? You can see it, you can hear it. Sometimes you could touch it, but you're really just touching an input to go into it, right? The screen doesn't touch you. But the UX for a building is all the senses.
Yeah. I mean, we were again, off air reference, funny story. Like we were joking that like they're apparently doing some plumbing work in my 100-year-old apartment building that I live in that has had each of our interior apartments completely torn down to the studs and rebuilt over the last like 2 years. So yeah, this is still a 100-year-old interface that I'm living. I happen to be living in a modern 2025 version of what the inside feels like, but the plumbing and the electricity and all that stuff is still basically dates back to literally 1926 or 25 when it opened, which is, and then that therefore then brings a certain level of different experience, right? Than someone who lives in an apartment building that was built in 2010 or something. That's, what's fascinating to me is you, like as an architect, then are you constantly, I mean, one, it must not be boring. Like it must be challenging, but it must not be boring because the way you describe that, are you constantly having to design for all of these interactions, like for all of these potential experiences, so to speak?
Yeah, we're really like curating a series of psychological experiences on the one hand. And the other hand, we're very legal and we're trying to be comply with code and regulations, right?
And is there a third hand there that is like you're also trying to make visual artistic statements, like as far as how it looks?
Yeah, even if it's with just paint. It's whatever you think you can inject or intervene into that context.
Huh. That's amazing. All right, so tell me about this concept. I didn't really know what this phrase meant until it became really popular in the last couple of years. Third spaces, right? So everybody talks about third spaces now in our culture. Like, what does that mean? And then secondarily to what does that mean? Like, do we have enough of them today in our cities or in our culture?
So the first space typically is your home. Second space is your work location. Your third space is usually wherever it's like a community space. It could be your local coffee shop, your local bagel shop. It could be your library. It's wherever you go outside of your work and home that is your community. It doesn't have to be a family. It can just be neighbors or by topic, by like-minded people. And co-working tries to be a third space because remember, in most people's work, someone hires you, someone pays you to go to their office, right?
So their second space, I guess, yeah.
Right. In a co-working space, you're choosing to pay to go there. It's a destination space. And so therefore, it's trying to be a third space, but with a work environment where although some co-working spaces are more socially bent and others are more work bent, but it can run that range of like a Soho house, which is, let's say, 80% social and only 20% work, where you go to a Regis or an executive suite, it might be the complete opposite, 80% work and only 20% social. Like you're there for work, but you get a little social component, icing on the cake. Blank Spaces tries to be around 60, 70%, where you're there to be productive, and you expect some social. Whereas, in the executive suites, the social is sort of like, nice to have, but you can find without it.
Yeah.
And then a space like a social club, like a Noi House might be 40, 60,
Okay.
like, so it's 60% social, but you are there for work as well.
And what's interesting, like having a year ago or so, we used one of your spaces, one of your blank spaces, one of the spaces inside of Blank Spaces in Venice, to host like a lunch and learn kind of thing for a mutual friend of ours. And what took me about that particular space of yours to this point that you were just making is like inside of one physical campus, so to speak, you guys could play with different spaces to feed those relationships, right? Like you could like, so I remember where we were for the lunch was like, that was meant for that, right? Or it could have been repurposed to other things, but like that was meant for that. But then there were like working and it was also, it's like kind of a beautiful campus, like flat campus, and not picture people that are listening. Don't picture like office high rise, picture more like suburban single story kind of laid out campus behind gates. And so therefore like different buildings with different purposes. And I always remember across from where I entered was with one of your incredible staffers that was showing us around. There was like a barber shop, right?
Yeah.
Who was like right there. And I was like, okay, so that's kind of like pseudo retail by appointment, right? Which is awesome. But yet it gave like so even inside of space, it's important, or architects are thinking about how to design spaces in ways that are adaptable and ways that can serve the different parts of the human experience.
Yeah, in a lot of the larger projects, we architects will put on paper all these things that we will propose as programming, or, it could be occupied by this thing, occupied by that thing, right? But in the end of the day, like a lot of us architects have never actually operated such a thing. They've never actually experienced that thing. These are all just ideas on paper. And so there's in my opinion, quite a big disconnect between what a lot of times our architects propose and what can even happen, or what will end up happening.
Interesting.
And what I've, been very fortunate is I've been able to be on both sides of that. I've been the architect person proposing it and then operating and seeing like, oh, what ideas did flesh out properly. And so by doing that across the last 20 years, I've been able to iterate that and be a little more accurate each time.
Yeah.
Whether it's a hair salon inside the co-working campus, and see if that would work. We also have a gym on site. We also have a cafeteria on site. So it's kind of like exactly what a tech campus might be, except that it's not all one employer. It's actually just one community.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Do you think the entrepreneurial life experiences has made you a better architect as a result of that?
Yeah, and many times I'm my own client, and so you're forced to contend with like quickly, what you're really going to design. That is the huge disconnect. Is a lot of architects, they can design physically and they can try to achieve a certain experience. During the lifespan of that building, it won't play out with the programming and the usage that the architects had anticipated. So it's really just ideas on paper.
Having said that, which is like super pragmatic, practical answer that I would expect from most architects, right? Like, is there just experientially, because you've been doing this for so long in your life, like, is there a particular style? Like, is there a design style that is someone would go like, oh, that's that's Jerome. Like Jerome likes to do that with these types of spaces. Or are you just a pragmatic generalist who says like, I'm capable, I have a big tool set, I'm capable of designing whatever works for this client or myself as the client?
I think more of the latter. Like I've worked for some pretty good architects, but nothing like Frank Gehry or Blau or some of these world famous architects. We don't use that term anymore, but like the world famous.
that was a popular term for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Renzo Piano, I know those guys. So I didn't get a chance to do that. But also like, I think most of my colleagues who, from architecture school, even when they work for those kind of firms, when they're on their own, they don't do anything remotely like that, because to land that kind of client, to land that kind of budget is so rare, at least until you become your own celebrity architect. It's just really rare. So you get more either pragmatic, or you just like inject in small areas what you get to do, but it's not as fantastical as some of these world famous architects. Like many of us would just love to do that one museum,
Of course.
And how many museums are there, right? It's
yeah.
Very few of us. I mean, I got to work on the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, but I didn't get to really design it. I got to work as one of like 12 people.
But still, iconic thing that I would imagine will last. I don't want to hesitate to say forever
until there's another world war.
I
right?
was just gonna say, like suddenly I can't just say forever, right? But in theory, something that is there for a long time that you could walk past and be like, hey, I had a part in that.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. So entrepreneur Jerome, let's talk to you for a second here. Tell us about Blank Spaces. This is kind of your commercial. So tell us help us understand the business of this, right? Like, I mean, there was a period pre-pandemic where it was the rage, right? And everything was co-working and that was the future. And then there was a period after when the pandemic was going on when no one was ever going to leave the house. And now we're caught in between some hybrid world of people are being called back to the office, but also some companies are really smart and attentive to their people and they're leveraging remote workspaces. And so tell us about Blank Spaces as a business, kind of its size, all the metrics, all the whatever you want to share with us that's not a secret. And then let's talk a little bit about the co-working business as an industry.
Yeah. 05, I was plotting my exit out of my current firm, my current employment. I sought to go solo as an architect. I knew I definitely wanted to share my office space with a few friends, partially just financially because the cost of the plotter, large format printer was going to be expensive.
Smart.
When I was running some numbers starting November 2006, I'm like, what if I made it a little bigger of a concept where I should have 30 people, 40 people, 50 people in this office space? And I was really benchmarking against my previous jobs where I'm like, hey, so if I had this office space, there's only 5 of us, what would that be like? If there were 20 of us, 50 of us? I arrived at 50 and the numbers worked out that way where basically the 49 other people would pay my expenses plus a little, some profit. Fast forward 6 months later, released my business plan, and some people were intrigued. I raised $150K in that first month, and I guess this is real. I went on to raise the other several $100,000 and open a year later, April of 08, with the fortunate and perfect timing, 5 months before the Great Recession hit in September of 2008.
Exactly.
So I was scrambling for a while. I had Chapter 11 papers in my hand, May of 2009. And, then I was able to survive. I played a little game of chicken with my landlord and restructured my lease.
Wow.
I was able to...
For context, 2005, 2006, is there even a phrase in the world, co-working?
Yeah, so it got coined in 06 by a guy named Brad Newberg, who then later on went to work at Google for a long time. But he started this thing called Red Hat Factory in San Francisco with a few other people, including someone named Chris Messina. Now, let me get to Chris Messina a little bit. They shared an office space. They were freelancers, and they kind of coined the term for this community workspace.
Yeah.
Technically, this idea of shared workspace has been around for decades, including back to Paul Fegan when he created the shared spaces for lawyers back in the, I think, 80s.
Okay.
He grew that too quickly, and really, a lot of landlords hated him after he ghosted them. And so that concept was sort of that he was sort of the Adam Newman at the time.
Right.
Very huge visibility and scaled really quickly, but then the whole thing imploded just like Icarus to the sun.
Yeah, that's why we should read those stories, right?
Yeah.
To learn those lessons.
From those ashes, the executive suite industry was either had been around or kind of got bigger and more mature, and companies like Regus today, which they call themselves IWG, continues to grow. So, small little tidbit: Chris Messina, who was part of that original team, he invented the hashtag.
What?
So
I don't think I ever knew that about him.
2010, when Twitter was in its infancy, he was one of the early adopters, and the early adopters were trying to figure out how to break up subject matters and be able to track them. He used the hashtag, and from there, boom.
I never heard that story. That's awesome.
So co-working invented the hashtag.
Right. And then, of course, probably hashtag co-working, and now all of a sudden it's a bigger thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I was able to then open a bunch of spaces from 2010 on, and sure enough, many other co-working competitors entered the market, and it became a bonanza.
Yeah.
But sure enough, like Icarus to the sun, many got grew too fast, got too ambitious, had bad financials, bad fundamentals. And so if they hadn't already closed by 2020, COVID put the nail on the coffin, and that includes some of my local competitors like Cross Campus and et cetera, unfortunately. So somehow I was able to survive that. Just so you know, from March 2020 to 12 months later, my revenues dropped 80%.
Yeah.
So I was in colossal pain as well.
Yeah.
I think I was just able to survive because I just somehow managed my cash flow. And this was technically my second, big recession.
I was gonna say, this is like your second black swan event in your tenure at that point, kind of an entrepreneurial career, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
And from there, I'm now bigger and healthier, and I think it's a better operation than it ever was.
So how many blank spaces around the region now?
Yeah, so I have 8 locations spanning from Long Beach up to Hollywood, and I manage about 150,000 square feet.
Awesome.
So I have 2 in Long Beach, 2 in Venice, 2 in Santa Monica, 1 in Culver City, and 1 in Hollywood. And I'm soon to announce 2 more locations in the West Adams Culver City location, which then will open hopefully by the end of the year or early next year.
And
so we're going to triple down in that Culver City area.
What a way to tie back to that original mentioned in the story of freeways cutting through vibrant communities. Like, boom, there you go, right? Going right back to one of those communities that got freewayed right out of existence. Good for you. That's awesome. How exciting. Is it blank spaces aside, because you've obviously figured out how to make it a healthy business. In the more broad sense, is it a healthier business now? Like, are the operators that are in this business, this industry now in the country or in the world, like, are they just more sensible about it? Is it more of an enterprise kind of corporate adjacent client business? Is it just a better business than it was when WeWork was trying to turn it into the sun?
Well, it's definitely better, and some people have learned their lessons. But this industry, at the end of the day, is only 2 decades. Yeah. So when you compare it to like the hotel industry, which is a similar model, they've been around since 90 years, right? So you can't even compare to that level of maturity. But I think the real benchmark is co-working against traditional offices, where they're looking at 30 and 40% vacancies. Many of are going upside down. They're handing keys back to the lenders. And this more service and flexible model is showing that it can have, at minimum, less bad than traditional office. And on the upside, at least it has an upside, much better. And there are many players in our market, in my industry, that are struggling or are small and they're learning, but there's also a bunch of us who have been doing this for a while and we know what we're doing. But that's like any industry, whether it's restaurants, coffee shops, or hotels, there's good ones and there are bad ones. So there's no, even AI, my God, there's AI ones that are just losing money hand over fist. But somehow they get good visibility because of the hotness of the industry.
We love a good hype cycle story in the United States. But I've got a question I was actually going to ask you later, but I think it fits better right here, right now. Talk in this vein as you were just describing, right? Like, I'm curious. I hear, and I frankly, I'm a bit of a pragmatist myself. I can kind of see arguments.
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Shore Capital. In today's venture capital world, it's not just about cash. It's about relationships. Capital is harder to find. Limited investors have fewer managers that they can trust. And the industry is just filled with far too much hype. Shore Capital is an early stage venture fund investing in the world's most ruthlessly iterative founders, helping its limited partners to find founders who are solving the world's most dynamic problems, teams that excel in mastering the idea maze, teams moving with a rapid, iterative velocity and demonstrating radical resourcefulness. Shore Capital doesn't just write checks, though. They become fractional co-founders when needed, offering strategic support, high-leverage relationship development, and a deep commitment to the long-term success of their portfolio companies. If you are a ruthlessly iterative founder with a bold vision or a limited investor seeking sustained access to the brightest big thinkers of our time, Shore Capital wants to meet you. So visit shorecapital.notion.site to learn more.
the arguments from all points of view. I have my own personal points of view, but I oftentimes don't let those dictate my perspectives on different industries or different things. So like, to me right now, like there's a viable case to be made in many different angles for like return to office for some particular industries, or for example, like I was reading an article recently about like, maybe the county government here in Los Angeles or the state of California, right? Because they're realizing not so much that it's about like worker productivity or anything like that, but that it's more about like masses of people coming back to reactivate a neighborhood, right? And to then therefore feed the businesses around them, which government is kind of considering as part of their role, right? So I'm curious, like your 50,000 foot view as a guy who is successfully built and operating in this space of spaces, like, is this world of kind of remote distributed work with some industries and some job titles being capable of that, and then others being more on site at corporate, like is that kind of stabilized now? Like that's going to be how it's going to be, and the percentages will just shift?
I think it depends on what you're talking to. In my point of view, we've entered what I call a pro-choice era.
Okay, by the way, that's a really catchy way to put it too.
Yeah, it's very loaded. When I was saying before, is that we co-working spaces are a destination workspace. People choose to pay to come to our space. Choice, right? And in the world of return to office and hybrid working, is I think the employers who kind of get it, have offered a half full scenario better than a half empty scenario. They have offered their workers a choice to come in, or they have created an office environment, and both physically and culturally, that creates a FOMO effect, that people fear missing out. They want to come in.
Yeah.
They want to come in because there's a great gym on site. They want to come in because they get to see that person they don't get to see normally.
Right.
Where they get to have lunch at that great eatery that they don't get to because they live farther away.
Sure.
Whatever those ingredients are, it creates a FOMO effect, but it's a matter of choice.
Interesting.
When there's a mandate, I think employers tend to lose out more than they win. Even in this soft market where the employers kind of have an upper hand, we're kind of a pre-recessionary economic status right now, is that the employers feel like they have the upper hand. They can institute the mandate, but the pendulum will swing, and that mandate will only last so long.
Yeah.
And so if you want to both be effective and keep morale up and retention, the employees will remember what you did.
Of course.
And so if you have a pro-choice situation, I think you'll win out overall.
That is the best description I've ever heard of that, and I'm never going to forget that phrase. That's awesome. I've thought for a long time, like if I was to ever start a big scalable company, like why would I want to get into like the real estate business, right? Like why would I want to make a huge chunk of our financial relationship to our business be a physical asset that is just sitting there, right? Why wouldn't I? And maybe this is just me, and I've been a remote guy since before remote was called remote. Like I was the field sales guy in the 1990s, and I always worked 3,000 miles away from wherever the headquarters team was. And I only saw them and built relationships with them when I got to travel back for quarterly meetings or whatever that was. And I just have always thought that was normal long before it ever became the thing that it became. But why wouldn't, help me understand, why wouldn't, not enterprise companies that own big real estate footprints now, I get that because they're stuck with it, right? But if you were making decisions about, hey, we're going to get rid of this parcel of land, or we're going to get rid of these, or we're building something from scratch, why would we buy a huge building to own it and operate it when we could just disperse our people or attract better, more diverse people by partnering with or becoming a master client, so to speak, of a BLANKSPACES or somebody, and saying hey, BLANKSPACES guy, I love the fact that you have locations in 8 different parts of LA, which is great because it's notoriously hard to get employees around in traffic. So we don't want to own a big building in one neighborhood. We want to partner with you to have our 400 employees choose wherever they want to work at your place close to you. Doesn't that just seem like that would be a good business model? Or I just don't know enough about it to know why it wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's going to be a lot of reasons, but I think one of the top reasons is unfortunately just ego. So
Okay.
you will find many small, medium-sized businesses where you have 30, 50, even 100 people. And it is not a coincidence that office is a mile away from the CEO's home.
Right, of course.
But of course, how many people can afford the neighborhood the CEO lives in?
It's a 130-mile commute for everybody else that works there. Right.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, even when we have done deals with enterprise teams where the manager gets to choose, every single time it's near the manager's place and everyone else suffers. So like, manager's like, hey, I get to make the decisions. So it becomes either ego or selfishness, unfortunately. It's just like human nature, I guess.
Yeah, right. Like we're just bad at doing good things.
But like, even on a financial basis, I think it was January 2019 is when the GAAP standards required, GAAP standards being general accounting, accepted accounting principles, said all publicly traded companies now have to report their leases on the balance sheets. So let me just say that a little slower. Typically, when you have a lease, XYZ company signs a 10-year lease, that rent is a operating expense on the profit and loss, the P&L.
Okay.
Right? And that's all it shows. You pay rent, it's an expense, you're done. But technically that lease is an obligation. It's a loan.
Right.
You are obligated for the 10 years to pay for it. So it should actually show up on the lease and on the balance sheet. So every month you pay, that liability drops down as you're paying it over here on the P&L, right? GAAP standards require public companies to then report it on the balance sheets. So those people who want to be asset light, who want to have high credit balance sheets, would offload that in order so they can get better and more favorable loans.
Okay.
That's one. And then private companies, I think a couple of years later, had to do that as well. So you have a situation where it depends on the company and the relationship with the bank. If the bank's going to fault them for having a liability-heavy balance sheet, or they're going to reward them for having an asset liability-light balance sheet. So financially, that dictates as well. So you have a situation where co-working is often cheaper to occupy, financial, both on the operational side, but also on the back end, on the balance sheet side.
Right.
And even legally, like if you're not properly reporting your books, then you're also, not complying with GAAP standards.
Right. Yeah.
Now,
is a whole other issue.
The hard part is that so many people are used to paying a face rate to co-working that is so much more expensive than what looks like to be the face rate of traditional. So I'll give you an example.
Okay.
In LA, we pay dollars per square foot on a monthly basis. In other cities, you often pay on an annual basis. So let's just go with the monthly rate. Let's say the office rate is $3, $4, $5 a square foot on an office lease, right? You will often pay $10, $12, $15 a square foot to the co-working. You're like, wow, I would never pay for co-working. Except then when you consider that it's not on your balance sheet, okay, maybe I'll pay $7. So that means I'm going to need an office manager to pay for the candy and pay for the utility bills and to just manage the office. How much was that person? Well, if I divide that into the square footage, now I have another $2 a square foot. Well, let's see. My company's doing well, but like, I don't know if I'm going to grow in 6 months or I'm going to contract in 6 months, especially in this economy.
No, exactly.
So when am I actually ready to sign your 10-year lease? I have no idea.
Right.
So now you have to be much more flexible so that you can contract and expand as you wish. So all those baked in, you're going to find that the $10 a square foot you pay on a face rate to co-working is actually much cheaper than committing to $3, $4, $5 a square foot on the lease that then also has a personal guarantee. So if you fail to pay it, they're going to go after you personally anyways.
Right.
So like, you got to factor all that in.
All that just confirmed my gut instincts for years, which has been, I've always thought it was just a literal better deal. Like I didn't just think it was like a flexibility convenience thing that like the headline pitch. Like I've always fundamentally believed it was a different deal. I just didn't know all the nuances of the math.
I mean, the simplest analogy is like, if you had to get an apartment, if you had to go to Paris, France, we live in LA, right? And you want to be there for 1 month. Would you get an apartment for 12 months or would you get a hotel for 30 days?
Right, exactly. Yes.
Right? So there are certain needs, certain goals, certain criteria that forces you is like, no matter how expensive it is per day, it's still cheaper than being committed to the 12 months, let alone having to pay up front to furnish it.
Yep. No,
right?
100%. I literally, you just did my story from like 7, 8 years ago without knowing. 2015 to like 2020, I was traveling a ton, mostly in Latin America. I was home here in Los Angeles a couple weeks a year and essentially was there. But I was there and I was always on the move. We were always working on different projects in different cities and whatnot. And I eventually spent so much time in Mexico City that I had like this consistent Airbnb that I would always go back to. Right. And then eventually the guy that owned that house, which had like 8 apartments in it, which was a beautiful old house that ironically he grew up in, which is a cool story. Right. Like he and I became friends because I was there so frequently. And then at some point after I'd been Airbnb in different units inside the building for almost 2 years, he just pulls me aside one night.
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Plaintext Capital. You know, investing in Web3 and cryptocurrencies isn't about jumping on the latest trends. It's about understanding where the market is headed and why. Plaintext Capital is a digital asset investment firm focused on long-term strategies backed by deep research, backing the best Web3 companies and protocols, and investing in the newest asset classes of the future. They believe that Web3 crypto will drive digital innovation for decades to come, creating significant value for investors. In fact, their team of highly skilled professionals work with institutions and serious individual investors who want clarity in a space full of hype and noise. So if you're looking to cut through the chaos and invest with purpose, Plaintext Capital brings a disciplined, high-conviction approach to investing. You can learn more and meet the team at plaintextcapital.com.
One night downstairs while we were having a beer and he was like, hey, I mean, if you just want me to like take one of those off of the Airbnb and just, it's yours. And then therefore you can like leave some stuff in it, right? Instead of like literally trekking your backpack and your bag, your suitcase out every week you go on the road. He's like, I mean, we could just like do month to month, or we could do it for 6 months or something. And like, I'll keep the cost pretty low. And so like we did the math and then the logistics of it. And it was just a better arrangement. And therefore I wound up with essentially what was one of my go-to Airbnbs turned into my apartment. That I didn't necessarily stay at any more or less, but like it was a financially well thought out trade as well as just being a convenience trade. But arguably I was also satisfying part of your argument by doing the Airbnb approach because that was offering me the flexibility and the lack of commitment. And yes, I was paying a bit more. People would always be like, oh my God, that's so expensive. I'm like, yeah, but it's relative to like, I'm literally not thinking about any of this. Like I'm coming to town to do work and I'm never going to be here except to sleep and maybe host a couple of friends. So, you know, it was always worth it to pay a little premium. That's fascinating. Are we, as a part of all of this, and this is going to segue us into what I want to get talking a little bit more about before we get to the last sections of our conversations here, is like, are we then like in for some kind of like a massive reset? Like of everything?
We're ready.
Of commercial real estate and co-working and how we go to employees go to work or don't and how landlords buy
we're already in the reset. So let me give you a few indicators. The LA office market is like 25, 30% vacant. And in some markets, Culver City just released last month, 29%. Downtown LA, probably 50%. In some areas, Lucky, Century City, like 10% vacant. Why? It's in center of town. But on the whole, 25, 30%. That's bad. Interest rates are high. So even housing, that we're in a housing crisis.
Which, we're about to talk about. Great segue. Good podcast cast.
Housing owners, multifamily, they have to be at 97% occupied in order to hit their numbers, because anything less, the operating margin goes down to zero or negative.
Yeah.
The carry cost is negative and the refinancing, whatever, all those things that developers know.
Yeah.
So even though we're in a housing crisis, the ability to even hold on to that multifamily is very difficult. The office market is 25, 30% official vacancy, shadow vacancy, which are people who have, let's say, 6 months left on the lease, aren't going in. They're paying the rent, but it will literally be in the shadows, about to be vacant and make the situation worse.
Okay.
We are also 40% less back in the office than we were in 2019 for LA.
Okay.
Okay. You remember pre-pandemic, the typical attendance in the office was only 50%. When you accounted for all the days, holidays, vacation days, sick days, meetings off-site, you were only in the office building 50% of the time, and you were at your desk 25% of the time.
Yeah, interesting.
So when you are 40% down, that means only 30% are back in the office, which is why so many buildings and neighborhoods seem so empty.
Yeah.
And this has become a crisis situation for CBDs, which is central business districts,
Right.
where that dry cleaner depended on the regular foot traffic of the business people to be able to clean their clothes. Where that lunch eatery that catered towards the business crowd now has no business crowd, and so they're suffering. So I can see why governments are trying to get people back in the office and revive those CBDs, but it's a real existential crisis because we have not enough housing, we have too much offices, and the developers who actually hold the keys to both sides of it are willing to really adapt and reallocate that mix. And then we have a lot of NIMBYs fueled by Prop 13 to then not make those neighborhoods more vibrant and therefore sustainable for a longer time.
How does it, and this is like the most, as you say, existential kind of big picture. I'm not even assigning it to.
We are in the resets.
Yeah. Like how does it work itself through? Like how does the system shake itself loose of all this? Assuming we're not like staring down the ultimate collapse and end of all things capitalist and freedom and democracy. I mean, so just again, the pragmatic, like history goes in arcs, right? Like great moments, great change, disruption, like come out the other side. It's new, it's different. It's like, I mean, like how do all of these pieces sort themselves out? And is this a over the next 20, 25, 30 years kind of thing?
No, so it's actually going to get worse.
Yeah.
We have had a population decline since 2008, which is reflected in college admissions. The peak competitive year for college admissions was the entering class of I think it was last fall, right? So they applied in the fall of 2024.
Yeah, okay.
Which is exactly 18 years after 2006 at the beginning of the
crisis.
Yeah. So since then, the birth rate has been dropping steadily since 2006, 2008.
Yeah.
And so for the next 10 years, for the foreseeable future, we're going to keep going down. Okay. The only way for that birth rate to go up is if affordability improves, namely housing and also inflation.
Right.
So that people usually in the 20s and 30s will form families.
So I'm going to inject a political comment here. Like, I'll tip my hand here. I've said this is how I think it shakes out, right? Like, are we staring down like an FDR level of like required, not like, oh, this would be a nice, progressive, cool thing to do, but like a required emergency intervention by the government, the federal government, starting with that, and then every other layer of government below it. Are we staring that down? That the only way to truly reshape this and stabilize it and get to something else on the other side that allows for incentives and forbearances and forgivenesses of all the different pieces is that like some massive government intervention that says like, hey, we broke it. We're going to have to fix it now. Yeah. That's what I've thought.
Unfortunately,
for like 15 years, I've thought that was coming eventually.
Yeah. Unfortunately, politics is in all aspects of our lives now, no matter how much you try to separate it.
Yeah.
Let's get a look at another indicator. Our birth rate right now is about 1.8.
Per 1.8 children per family.
Well, yes, per mother.
Per mother, right? Yeah, exactly.
In countries like Korea and Japan, we're down to like 1.2, 1.3.
Yeah, I've read that about Japan.
They're literally staring down a non-existence in like 50 to 75 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you got aging population, not enough workers feeding the social security systems. So all of that.
Japan is shooting themselves in the foot by now allowing immigration. They've always not been pro-immigration.
Yeah.
But look what the U.S. did. We just clamp down on immigration.
And
And there's one of the reasons why we have a net outflow out of California is that we have less immigration inflow to balance that out. We've always had an outflow and an inflow, but the inflow in the US in general and in California have statistically had inflows in. But when that pipe in dried up and has gone to its historical low
and quickly. We're not, this wasn't a policy decision that was made in a vacuum, which, we felt it like a decade later. This was a policy decision that was made egregiously and publicly, not in a vacuum.
In the last 2 years.
In the last 2 years. And we felt it a year ago.
Right. So we need policy to reopen up immigration for one.
Yeah.
We need politicians to navigate our economy so that we can get back to a 2.5% inflation rate. Right now, we're about to hit 4%. I believe they just came out.
Yeah.
We need, therefore, then affordability to improve, which usually tied in with housing affordability, which also housing production. Perversely, though, in about a decade, we will actually have a lot more housing. So this crisis is technically temporary, from what I understand.
Okay.
Why? Because in 10 years, our current boomers and seniors will get so old that they will have passed away. And eventually the homes that they have held onto, like one senior living in a 4-bedroom house for many reasons, will finally get released back into the supply.
Yeah.
So the millennials have suffered by becoming an adult during the housing crisis, and Gen Z also, but the younger Gen Z, by the time they're in the 30s and forming families, will actually have a field day in having choices for housing.
By the way, you also just put words to the other thing that I say all the time about many of our problems that we face is sadly, we just are going to have to wait for boomers and old Gen Xers and the old boomers that are in charge to just die off. Literally a part of our solution is literally just waiting for generations that have monopolized everything to literally pass. All right. So I'm curious, before we get too far afield into our Joe Rogan version of this podcast, which is awesome, by the way, this is freaking awesome. I want to pull one little thread out of what we were discussing a little bit ago, because I'm curious, because you're deep in this. So one of the things you hear talked about when it comes to one tool in the toolbox of the housing crisis problem, and then how it relates to the commercial property glut or over abundance of commercial properties that we don't need because of all the worker statistics that you just described, is this idea of converting commercial spaces to housing, which I've read, and I could be wrong, so please educate me on this. I bet you're much more expert than I am. I've read that only 19 or 20% of commercial spaces in general terms anywhere, not just Los Angeles, are actually physically easily normally convertible to these types of things. And then of course there's another layer of financing and rules and permitting processes and all that kind of stuff that government can turn the lever on. So one is that even really a tool in the toolbox that is of any meaning or import? And then two, how else do we what else do we do to we can't just have a city that has and not just our city. We're using our city as a proxy for all cities. You can't just have a city that just has rows and rows, neighborhoods of just empty, formerly busy commercial office buildings that are just sitting there empty, blocked out, locked down. Can we? Can we just, are we going to live in that world for the next 15, 20 years until this stuff all gets pulled apart?
So I have a similar understanding of about 18-20% of conversion from resi to from office to resi, and the rest of it cannot be because it's not feasible.
Yeah,
the office floor plates for most offices are too deep, and actually that reveals how inhumane our office spaces were in the first place. When you go to design office spaces in other countries, you can't be that far away from daylight.
Oh, so okay, whoa! Now we're back to architecture Rome.
Other countries,
so architecture Rome is
to daylight.
We've literally been designing part of our own problem here.
Yes. And some other countries are much more humane, and therefore they had to convert office to resi. They could, because when you design apartments, you must have access to daylight. And so therefore that's possible. In the US, we have to build offices that didn't have that access. And so they literally have to cut entire cores out of the middle of an office space in order to even start the conversation of making it feasible.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what you end up happening is having very skinny and deep apartments, where the deeper the apartment is, which is the core and the center of the office building, will just be storage, or maybe a couple bathrooms.
Yeah.
And then you have a lot of storage, but that's it. But that's a lot of wasted space.
And apparently here in Los Angeles, some of the only people that have figured out how to do this and do it really, really well are these Jameson property people in Koreatown. Like they, yeah, there seem to be more, and it's on my mind because I used to live in the neighborhood. My daughter and her fiance used to live in the neighborhood, and I just read a story the other day, and I think at the Times, about like this building that's kitty corner from the Wilshire Western, or from the Wiltern Theater, and also then obviously across the street from the subway station too. And I mean, the last 10 years I can remember, it has been basically a derelict office building. And it is now open as new apartments. And it took probably 8 years of this Jameson property group, which has been basically just doing this all up and down Wilshire in Koreatown for a decade or more. And I'm like, okay, we need Jameson to like get out into some other parts of town. We need Jameson to come up to Hollywood, start doing some of these old buildings in Hollywood as well. But, so, I mean, it's almost overwhelming, right? To a certain point. I mean, it's basically an admission that we are in, you know, the optimist guy goes like transformative, right? but then the other part is like transformative, right? Like we're in a very transformative, disrupted. We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Haney and Company. You know, we all know that in today's complex financial landscape, having a trusted advisor can make all the difference. Since 1960, Haney and Company has been providing comprehensive accounting services to a diverse range of clients, from small businesses to large corporations. With nearly 400 professionals across 13 locations, they offer services in tax, audit, business consulting, and client advisory. In fact, their commitment to excellence has earned them recognition from Accounting Today and Forbes magazines. At Haney and Company, though, it's not just about balancing books. It's about building lasting relationships based on trust and mutual growth. So visit HaneyCPAs.com. That's HaneyCPAs.com to learn how they can support your business's financial journey. Unstable era, and we're going to be in it for a bit here. And it essentially touches, I mean, we start from a place of physical space, and this is the world that we live in. And what we're talking about is that like every component aspect of, as you would say, teach us, the lived experience of us as users of the world, right? Whether we're a user of our office space or the apartments or homes we live in or the physical world outside, we're passing through it. We're experiencing what was built, not necessarily for us, but what was built. And what you're saying is for all of that, the built, the converted, the experience, the finances of it, the government relationship to it, the policy making of it, like we're going to be shaking this out for the next 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, we're going to continue to see more unhoused people. We're going to see more people who are very close to becoming unhoused. And if they don't get unhoused, then they get, they just live by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah.
Housing affordability is the number one reason why we have a lot of issues. Just put another stat out there. 2021, during the heat of COVID, I was reading a stat how the LA area, I forget the city of LA or LA County, but let's LA area, needed 450,000 housing units immediately.
Yeah, right.
Next day, not next month.
Like we already had like a deficit. Yeah.
Right. 450,000. And we're even worse.
I think our commitments, like our legal commitment to the states, to the relationship that we have on funding and certain things, is that not like between, I think it was last year, between 2025 and 2030, the requirement is another 440,000 or 430,000 or something like that. So we're already in a deficit, and then and in truth, last year I think we built like 23,000.
That's right. So we're perpetually behind.
Yeah.
And then we lost whatever, like 5,000 or 6,000 between Pacific Palisades and the Altadena area. So like that was another step back. That's really bad. Yeah.
Wow.
It's we're in a tough situation. My view and thesis on LA remains the same when I first moved to LA in 2003, is LA is really a a very evolved suburb.
Pretty much.
Okay. It's
Yeah.
not really a city, in my opinion. There
Yeah,
are
not-
city
not-
elements,
Right. Exactly.
not
Yeah.
city like the way you see Tokyo, Hong Kong, New York, in Boston, right? And so it's going through its teenage years, and we will have to have a population increase bump to force the hand for the cities to really do this, and or something like a pandemic that makes people realize that we must, or for example, the decimation and vacancies of offices to force the hand to make more housing units. And then therefore the walkability and improve the affordability of these neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just not going to be sustainable. But like basically, in my opinion, LA needs to go through this next difficult growth period to get to its next like natural state.
That's awesome. You and I share a very similar view of it. I've said that. I one, because I'm a history nerd, and so I look back and go like every city, but our city in particular has this cycle of repeats and renaissance. And yes, there is another renaissance growth period at some point in our future, but it's a matter of getting through this current one. I'm curious. This is almost a silly question to ask now because we've exposed the rawness of this, but I want to ask it anyways because it's an imagination exercise, and I think that's really important for people, especially in a city like ours, which is full of dreamers and doers. I say. Like if there was a position, if there was the chief architectural visionary position in Los Angeles, and they said to you, "We're gonna imbue you, Jerome, with unimaginable power to either change the landscape." That's kind of the way I was going to ask the question originally. Maybe now I'll reframe it and say like to paint a picture for how we get through this to come out the other side in a period of renaissance. What would be some hallmark things that you would take your blank slate out and start thinking about?
Yeah, I would really increase mobility options, mass transit, busing, biking, scooters, whatever it takes, just to remove cars off the road. So that, it's a crazy number. It's like, I think 30 or 40% of all car trips are a mile or less.
Yeah.
And then
right,
50 or 60% is 3 miles or less. If you can just cut out the mile, you have a 30% improvement right off the bats. But we need the infrastructure for that mobility. And then we need to create more variable density neighborhoods where you have single family and you have multifamily that could be 50 apartment units in an apartment building, so that you can use a more efficient use of water and your infrastructure, but you can also improve your walkability, because not everyone wants to live in a single family house. Even though it is very desirable for many, it actually is not desirable for others,
Sure.
And they want to be near the bagel shop. They want to be near that bar or restaurant or work, whatever that is.
That's why I'm the crazy 58-year-old guy that actually, contrary to most public opinion in this city, loves living in the neighborhood I live in, Los Angeles. Because I've literally created my own little 15-minute city life, 15-minute life that everybody says they want. Like, I'm like, well, I didn't wait for the city to create it for me. I just created it. I moved myself into a neighborhood where I could walk across the street to public transit. I could walk across the street to retail. I could walk to the grocery store, to my doctor's appointments, to the mountains behind me to hike and get nature, to the park a couple of miles from me that way, to my grandson and my daughter that way as well. But like that, it is doable, right? It's limited, right? Because only so many people can fit in the neighborhoods that already exist like that. So your point is more neighborhoods like that, like more neighborhoods that are accessible and mobile and movable like that.
Yeah, so I live in Torrance in the South Bay, and when you look at the landscape across that entire area, in Torrance, which is 150,000 plus people, there's only one neighborhood called Old Torrance, only one neighborhood that is walkable.
Ironically, I have a friend that lives in Old Torrance neighborhood-ish. Yeah, because he wanted to
Nothing else.
Yeah, exactly.
Is walkable.
Yeah.
The city of Torrance, like this, should easily have a half a dozen, if not 10 or 12 of them, in order to make a vibrant, sustainable neighborhood city that has ranges of affordability, ranges of different lifestyles all in there.
Yeah.
Right?
So less concentration in these old school, like 1900s era, build a massive downtown, funnel all transit through it. Everything else becomes like an exurb or an extension. More this idea of like I don't know what the word would be, like,
well,
like a diaspora of mini downtowns in neighborhoods all over the city.
Look, the mega downtown still serves its great purpose.
Yeah.
And there's clearly an audience for that. the problem is that LA is, like I said, is a very evolved suburb. It was built on a super high percentage of single family homes. I forget the number. It's crazy.
Well, it's like 62 or 63% or something
of all single families in the entire LA County.
And I've always found that number ironic because alternatively, 64% of Angelenos rent. And so I'm like, wait a minute, what? Like, unless a lot of people are renting the single family houses that they live in, which I don't think is the case, then we have a weird imbalance from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Literally, there's so many. I'm like, dude, you've blown me away. This is amazing. This is like so much more than I thought. All right. I want to pull us back and I'm going to go back into being a podcast host again, and wrap us up before we finish up. I don't want to, we already kept you longer than I wanted to. So thank you. I want to respect your time, but this has been fascinating already. A couple of like just creative kind of like, let's imagine again, just creative questions to end up before we get to our last question in the last segment. Like when you're walking through a space, again, you said in the very beginning, like you can't walk through life as an architect and not essentially have your business be on all the time, right? Which is probably an annoyance as well as also inspiring sometimes. So in the inspired mindset of you, when you're walking through an amazing office space or an amazing public space, like, are there particular design intentions that you see that you're like, I love that? Like more spaces should do that? Are there specific design attributes of physical spaces that you're like, oh man, that just speaks to me. It makes me happy?
It usually comes down to execution. So whether the designer meant it or not, but like I hate it when I turn on a faucet in a bathroom or a restaurant and it doesn't line up with the hole. Like they're off by like an inch. Oftentimes it drives me nuts because it's like, it's a template. They could just install it, but they don't. Where when I look at, a acoustical ceiling grid, the 2x4 or the 2x2s, and there's like a half inch or 1 inch sliver.
You're like, that was just lazy execution.
It drives me nuts. Or, like a floor base, the floor doesn't meet the wall base well. Like, this is just execution. Like, this is just crummy. It's really, really, really sad. Otherwise, the architecture, I actually heard a quote about on the architecture side of it, which is unfortunately the state of where we are now, is the whole 4+1. It's like 4 stories on top of a 1-story podium.
Yeah.
It's usually like a concrete podium and 4 stories of wood structure. And that's everywhere. That's like the standard template. And the architect's like, we're not even designing anymore. All that is a financial analyst spreadsheet.
Yeah, right. Coming
4+1, how many units, boom, boom, boom. And then the only thing we architects are left to do is just draw what they put on numbers,
right,
and then paint a color. Like there isn't any architecture left on that. So, and that's the bulk of what multifamily apartment designers are doing now.
And like that doesn't have to be the way, right? I mean, like we could design. I mean, maybe we wouldn't design things as unique or beautiful as this 100-year-old building that I live in, but like we could design, or could we? Are we limited financially? Like, does it have to be that way? Or could people still say, I want functionality, but I want it to be beautiful or unique?
There is a movement that was based on code. I think Austin, Texas was one of the first cities that actually adopted the following. But basically these courtyard apartments. So there is perhaps an overemphasis on egress. So fire and life safety, so that you can properly exit through a corridor, right?
Right.
And
right. Austin has the whole single staircase thing they passed, which by the way, we're trying to get past here. And Ash,
that's right.
Shout out to Councilperson Rahman, who I had on the show when she talked about it back in 2025, before she decided to try and become mayor. Like she had actually proposed it at the city council here before Austin then essentially copied it and then approved it faster. No surprise there.
Yeah, that will unleash a new apartment format.
Okay.
That will reduce the costs for construction. It will create a different kind of relationship between your neighbors within a building, and really just reassesses. Amazing? Yeah,
like that's
fire departments really hate this, but like there is, it's gotten to a point where like we've gotten so bad in terms of regulation and cost, and also format of the building, that like you really have to address like what's the one thing holding that back is the fire departments. So if they can either ease up or reassess like their calculations,
Right.
that would enable the architects to then reintroduce this that we used to do, that Europe continues to do, and statistically it becomes a insignificant casualty.
Right.
Yeah,
Wow.
so I'll give you a simple example. Before I was an architect, I have a bachelor's and master's in structural engineering.
Yeah.
And when I was getting my engineering degree, a new standard in structural engineering was coming about as a standard. And it's called LRFD,
Okay.
load resistance factor design. It was basically using statistics to design the safety of a structure. So previous to that, it was allowable stress design. It would just look at the material performance and say, okay, a piece of wood can do this, and we're going to cut in half its performance, thereby doubling the requirements.
And steel is different, or cement.
That will be a conservative number. It was just an even 2.0 number.
Okay.
Because that's what they did.
Yeah.
Right. And they're studying all these different structures and realize like, hey, it's actually a lower number than 2, but it depends on what kind of weight was on it. If it was a passive weight, like the weight of the material itself or the material attached to that beam, we're going to assign only 1.4 to that. But if it's a live load, that was called dead load. If you have live load, that means people walking on it, snow that may be on it, may not be on it, right? That's a 1.7. Both of them less than 2.0. That enabled a whole new way of designing that you could be a little more aggressive. You could be a little more creative because you weren't so shackled with a 2.0 number that was based on allowable stress design.
Right.
So if we had a more statistical probability based on research.
Yep, of course.
For this fire design, they would probably find out that they can be, maybe some buildings need to be still two exit staircases, but many more only will need one. Or maybe it's just you need an extra one for like certain floors, but not all the way, whatever that number is, somewhere between 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Right. And we already went that through structural engineering. And if I think the fire department can do that, then we're in a good place.
Wow. And what I love about that answer and this last couple of questions discussion is like, it leads us back to this whole, yes, all of this is related, right? So it's all interwoven, the politics of it, the governance of it, the design of it, the engineering of it, the financing of it, the humanity of it. Like inevitably it's all woven together.
That's right.
Which was one of the absolute reasons that selfishly I wanted to have this conversation with you, right? Because I don't want to just talk to a politician about this stuff, right? I want to talk to someone who's thinking about this through the consumption of and the building of and the mechanics of and the financing of design, right? Because what you've taken us all the way back to is kind of the top of it which is all of this is experiential. We're either living where we're living on the outside of these things and we're taking something, or in real life, we're living inside of these systems. And the world is the plumbing, right? And we're living inside of it and it's all interwoven. So how we've gotten ourselves, as you said, so eloquently and very specifically, like about our policy choices around Prop 13 at the time, it made sense. Like at the time, it wasn't an unreasonable thing to discuss or propose at the time in that world, but then to never adjust it, to never update it, to never reconsider it is like a heinous crime that would be akin to never revisiting the LRFD standard versus the other standard. Like if you had never done that, then we would be forever stuck in that. If you don't contemplate a world in which apartment development inside of a city can have single staircase and still be safe, like if you don't contemplate and do the math on that, then you live in a world that is basically back to our original thesis question, right? Like, are we living in a world, you corrected the record, we're really living in a world that was basically mostly built and designed when I was like 10 years old. And that's obscene. That's ridiculous. Like I have a grandson now. Like he's 2. He's almost 2. Like he should not live in basically the same physical form world that I lived in. Or that was designed for his grandpa in Chicago in the 1970s. That's just ridiculous. So thank you for that. All right. So last question. This is our closing segment question. Thank you for giving so generously of your time. Like this question's a little bit different vibe. You and I have covered the philosophy of all of this and we could go on and talk for hours, which would be incredible. But this one's a bit punchier, like more bullet point answer. And I want to tap kind of I don't want to call you an activist, but I want to call you an engaged citizen, like the community guy in you who gives a damn about all these things that we just talked about, and who gives a damn about his neighborhood in Torrance and about his neighbors and about his community and about the places, the neighborhoods that your blank spaces are in. Talk to me if you're an architect today, like, so you have someone who has all the same skills and experiences as you, but in their own way. And they want to be more involved in their community. And maybe they're frustrated. Maybe they're frustrated architects, right? Who are sitting around listening to this and thinking, shit, like I'm frustrated by the built out nature of Los Angeles, or I'm frustrated by how Chicago is devolved or evolved. And like, I want to be a part of the solution. What are two things? What would be two steps or two things to decide to do that architect who says, I want to use all my skills and knowledge and perspective to try and change the design, the trajectory or the planning nature of my city that I live in, how do they get involved? What are the two things that architect should do to find their way into being involved in their community or their neighborhood?
I think just read and be engaged, be aware. And then the second part is be responsible or accountable,
in the work that they do.
If you don't, then you have to just look in the mirror and say, I did nothing to help this. And if it's bad, then I must pay the price or the consequence for doing absolutely nothing.
So I sat back quietly and I just did the plans and sent them off for the 4/1 plan that the finance guy said we should do a 4/1. I didn't challenge it. I didn't try and convince anybody about single staircase. I didn't study the local issues. Like, well, then guess what, buddy? Like, you're going to live in this shitty world that is 4/1 apartments on every corner.
We all can do our little parts to slowly make things better or right. And then you can look back and say, I did try to make that change. I think really that's the best our conscience can do for ourselves.
I love that. That is fantastic advice specific to the architect who's listening, as well as just to the general citizen who is listening and wants to contribute. You don't all have to go run for the local board of education in your town. You don't have to run for your neighborhood council or city council.
That's right.
But you could sure as hell try and make a difference. That's awesome, man. I can't thank you enough. This is.
Thank you so much for this.
It exceeded my expectations. It was a blast, just emotionally. It was so engaging. This was literally like you sitting with a friend talking about stuff you love to talk about over a cup of coffee. So thank you for that. How can people find or follow Blank Spaces, or you give us the website address, stuff like that? If you want people to find you on socials, how do they find you and engage with you on socials? And then we'll put all this in the show notes as well. But let's mention it here.
Yeah, the easiest is just LinkedIn. It's my first name and last name, Jerome Chang. There's very few Jerome with the last name Chang. I think
it is it's a great naming convention, by the way.
Or you can just email me, jerome@blankspaces.com.
Awesome. And Blank Spaces, as we said, folks, we'll put the website down there so you can find them. They're all over town. And then he announced by the time this episode comes out in June, it'll probably be a more timely announcement of a couple new locations that are coming to a great part of town where I've got a whole bunch of friends that live. So if you're looking for some place to set up shop and do some work, or if you're a company that you're just thinking a little bit more smartly, a little bit more forward thinking, a little bit more innovatively about how to build out your company, and you don't want to go buy some office building because your ego isn't that big. You want to do the smarter thing that also is the better thing for your employees and your teams. You can seek out the team at Blank Spaces. I can vouch for the team. You don't always get to Jerome, but the team of people that work for him at all the different locations are incredibly good people. They're very much like their boss. They're all good, kind-hearted people, smart people. They're all there to try and help. And they all see their mission as creating spaces that are conducive to people being creative, building businesses, building their careers, and pursuing their dreams. So if you're looking for that type of place here in town, there are definitely spaces to go find. So awesome. Thank you, my friend. This is terrific.
Cool.
And as always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show is produced by our team at the Storytellers Company in Mexico City and Los Angeles. And you can always find, follow, subscribe, and share our show as found on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you find your favorite podcast by searching Entrepreneurial Thinkers with Rob Ryan. You can also follow along on our various social media platforms for clips and contents at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And if you'd like to connect with me, our host, you can find me just about anywhere on social under the handle I am Rob Ryan. Thanks, and have a great day.